Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day today. Today, we're going to be talking about a very cool budget-oriented optic. This is, of course, the UTG OP3 or OP3. This is their 3-12 version. They also make it in a 4-16, and you can find these guys for around $200 or a little bit underneath $200. For $200, they are pretty much excellent. So, I'm going to go really quickly through a lot of the features of it, and then later on in the video we'll get into some of the more nitty-gritty. So, as I mentioned, 3-12 magnification. It's good for pretty much anything from about 50 yards on 3x all the way out to 800 to 1,000 yards on 12x. It may not be completely optimal for all of those ranges, but it does give you a lot of variation and a lot of things that it can do with that magnification range. The optic itself, when you take off the included 3-inch sunshade on here, is only 10.1 inches long, and it's only 21 ounces. So 21 ounces is pretty light for a 3-12 magnification optic, which is really nice. And of course 10.1 inches is also fairly short. So without the sunshade on there, it's actually fairly compact and looks pretty good. Now I generally leave the sunshade on just because it will increase your contrast a little bit by cutting out some of that side-to-side light. Now on the 3-12, you do of course have a pretty stiff magnification throw on here. It's not too bad, and it is very smooth. There's no grit to it whatsoever, but it is a little stiff, so it's not going to get bumped super easy. There is a little raised knob on there to make it slightly easier to change your magnifications. You actually have a locking ring on your diopter, so you have two little rings that you can lock against each other, so you can lock and unlock. So you can set it to where your eye is at and then lock it in place, which is actually a really nice feature for a budget optic, something around the $200 price range. It's something that you don't see pretty much anywhere else for this price point. The tube that they have on this guy here is a 30mm tube. The lenses are emerald coated lenses, and they say that it's best in class light transmission and clarity. And for the money, I'm going to have to agree with them, but we'll show you some pictures and give you some demonstrations later on that. We do have a side adjustable wheel for your parallax, and it is accurate. So at 50 yards, you set it to 50 and it will be perfectly in focus and be parallax free. At 100, the same thing. So with a lot of budget optics, you know, anytime you're spending less than $500 to $1,000 on an optic, the side parallax wheel will be off. So the numbers on it will not correlate to the actual distance. On this guy, they absolutely do. The reticle that they went with on this optic is also, in my opinion, a great choice. It's what they call the UMOA reticle. So it's a reticle system that's an MOA, obviously, as the UMOA dictates. And it is in 2 MOA hash marks. So on the side, I believe you have 20 left and right, and you have 40 up and down. Now they're in 2 MOA hash marks, and you have 2 MOA left and right, so you can kind of get your windage in there. And in the center, they have a very simple kind of a cross reticle that has some gaps in it, but it's all measured in the 2x, or in the 2 MOA, I should say. So you have a very clear center point, a very, very fine line in the middle for your very precise aiming, and everything is in 2 MOA increments. What that means is that in normal ranges anywhere from 0 to 500 yards, using the reticle, which is accurate, and I did measure it out, so you will be able to use pretty much just the reticle out to about 500 yards, and you won't need to dial anything. Now at 500 yards, you're generally looking, depending on your cartridge, barrel length, all that sort of fun stuff, you're looking at about 10 MOA drop. But on here, another nice feature, if you did want to dial, you have these really nice big lock rings with these really short and wide turrets. These are some of my favorite adjustable turrets on any scope. The clicks on them are very small because it has such a wide surface area on there. So the adjustments are very small, but they're very tactile, and I'll let you listen to it for a second. And they return to 0 very, very well. Now, one downside on this optic is that to reset the 0, you have 3 little Allen keys on each one that then pull it up, and then you put it back down to place, and then you lock it in. And you need to be really careful when unscrewing and tightening them that you don't over tighten or over loosen, because you can lose that and then it'll pretty much become useless at that point. So I don't like the zeroing method on it, but once you get it zeroed, you really don't have to adjust anything on it, because you can use the reticle on it, which is just fine. That's kind of my preferred way to do it, especially 2 MOA hash marks are very, very precise. And in my opinion, opinion, an MOA reticle that has very simple, very fine hash marks works really, really well. Now, in terms of testing, for the majority of this scope's life, it has been on an AR-10. Originally, I put it on this guy, which is a 16-inch AR-10 that you see right here, and I used the included scope rings, which are their medium height 30mm scope rings that UTG supplies with this scope. And I found them to be completely inadequate, and they would not hold zero on an AR-10. Originally, I had actually thought that it was the scope losing its zero. I was getting really odd variations. I know this gun is a 1 MOA gun, and we'll show that at the end of this video. And I was getting just really weird variations. So with 5-shot groups at 100 yards, I was getting 2 or 3 right on top of each other, and then I would get a flyer like 4 inches to the left and then like 4 inches to the right. And so at that point, I thought that the scope was not able to handle the recoil of a 308 and it was losing zero. So then I went ahead and I threw it on a much lighter recoiling gun, which is my ACR DMR. Now this is a different optic on here. This is a UTG 1-8, which I love. I've had these guys on AR-10s, AR-15s. They work great and they're extremely durable. I've never had an issue with one of them. But I threw it on my ACR and it did flawlessly for a couple hundred rounds. No zero shift, no issue whatsoever. But at that point, since I wasn't really seeing any zero shift or any issues with the 3-12, the OP3, I decided I'm going to put it back on an AR-10, but I'm going to put it in a much more high quality mount. And of course, that turned out to be my issue. So the mounts that come with this scope from UTG, the 30mm medium height rings, are completely inadequate for anything greater than 5.56, and if you're dropping it or treating it roughly, you're going to lose zero. So after that, I went ahead and put this UTG OP3 into the UTG Accusync mount. Now the Accusync mount, it's still made by UTG. You can find it for anywhere from 30 to 40 bucks. They are, in my opinion, phenomenal for the price. I don't think there is a better mount out there. It's not QD. It has an incredibly long locking surface with 3 locking lugs on the inside and on the outside of your mount. And then it, of course, is a 30mm mount with a high profile. So it has a 1.5-inch height to the center of your tube. And it pushes it forward. I think on this one here it's 50mm, so you can get even longer ones from UTG. So the UTG Accusync mount is pretty much a perfect mount in my opinion. So one of the most important things when testing any optic is zero shift, especially on a 308 or doing anything long range. If you have anything starting to affect your zero shift, trying to make shots at longer range is going to be pretty much impossible. So the testing that I did for this was very simple. I took it out on a cold bore and I zeroed it. Alrighty, so right here we did our 3-round zeroing group. So there's 3 rounds right in here, 308. Ignore that, that's a 2-2-3 shot. That was first round for a 0. So we are perfectly zeroed. That is 100% perfect zero at 50 yards for the 308 using 168 grain Sierra Match King. We're going to go through about 100 rounds right now, hit it really rough, see if that scope mount holds up, and then at the end we're going to do another 3-round confirmation group at 50 yards, see how it holds up. So this is our initial one. We'll see how our second one does. And I put 3 rounds with 168 grain Sierra Match King right on top of each other. This is at 50 yards, but still the group was about 1/4 inch, so it was definitely under MOA, so it was a really good group at 50 yards. And then I went ahead and I shot 100 rounds very quickly of 308, just to kind of see if that affected zero at all. I let the barrel cool down a little bit. It was still warm, so it wasn't a cold bore, so it's not going to be as accurate. I shot 3 more rounds of 168 grain Sierra Match King from Magtech, and the group opened up a little bit, which is what you would expect after shooting 100 rounds. The barrel is now warm at that point, or hot at that point, I should say. But when you weighed out where the average of those bullets were, it had moved less than a half MOA, which is perfect. After 100 rounds, hot barrel, it's still hitting in the exact same spot. So we knew that the recoil was not affecting the mount or the optic. Then I went ahead and instantly, right after that, I did a double drop test. So I did 1 drop test completely from shoulder height, so about 5 feet, 5.5 feet in this case, and then I did 1 on its side as well. So I did 2 drops back to back, and then I shot another 3-round group. Let's go ahead and do drop number 1. Ow. And let's go ahead and do drop number 2. Ugh, right on top. All right, now let's go ahead and shoot our last confirmation group and see if zero shifted at all. 3-round group pretty much replicated the group right before it with no zero shift. So from a cold bore, then to 100 rounds fairly quickly, then to a double drop test, I essentially had no shift in zero, which is exactly what you want to see and is excellent for any optic. So Then right after I did that, because UTG also says this is IPX7 certified, which is a half hour at a meter of submersion in water. So after the drop test, after all that, so if there anything had come loose or got knocked, it definitely would not be waterproof at that point. So I threw it, I didn't have a meter of water, but I did throw it in a tub for a little bit over a half hour. And of course, it's phenomenal. As you saw in the intro as well, this guy has been through a lot of water. Multiple drops, a lot of ammunition between originally the 308 on bad rings. The rings that it come with, like I mentioned, are not good. Then on the 5.56, which of course it performed phenomenally. Then of course back on the Air 10, a lot more shooting, drop tests, submersion tests, and it's all still going with flying colors. So the durability on this optic for, again, the $200 price point, I would say is perfect and will meet or exceed most standards of any scope out there. Now, I'm not saying it's the most durable scope in the world. I'm not saying it can compete with the big boys in any way, shape, or form, but I am saying for 99.9% of people, this optic is going to be more than rugged enough, more than durable enough in anything that you throw at it, even if you're doing underwater shooting for some reason, to hold up just fine, even on aggressive guns like AR-10s, 5.56, all that sort of fun stuff. So now that we've talked about that, and I really do like this optic, let's talk about a couple things that I'm not a fan of and what are the drawbacks of a $200 optic. Now, the glass clarity, as I mentioned earlier, UTG claims that it is best in class, and I actually do agree with them. So for instance, in one of my last videos was on a Remington's, or not a Remington, it was on a Mossberg Patriot in 7mm 08, which had a Nikon P308 reticle, which is more of a mid-range optic on it. So it is a $400 optic, $500 optic from Nikon, and the glass quality between the Nikon and this guy is pretty much on par, and I would actually say that this guy is a little bit brighter. Now, what they say about glass clarity and light transmission is correct. This has good clarity, not perfect edge-to-edge clarity. There is some haziness around the very, very edges of the optic, but the overall in the most of the optic, it is very bright and very, very clear, on par with a lot of mid-range optics, even better in some circumstances. Where the drawbacks come from, and I think this kind of has to do with the form factor and how short it is when you take off the sunshade, is that the eye box on here is pretty unforgiving. So, the eye box on here, they say it's like 3.2 inches, and that's at 12x. So at 3, you have about 3.5 inches of eye relief, and you have a little bit of forward and back play that you can do, so it's a little forgiving forward and backwards, but your left, right, up and down eye box is incredibly tight. And then when you go up to 12x, it becomes incredibly tight in the forward and backward dimension. So at 12x, your head needs to be in pretty much the perfect spot. Now, this is not a big issue if you're sitting prone somewhere trying to take long range shots, which is what you're going to be doing at 12x anyways. However, if you needed to go quickly from one point to one point to one point, like a PRS match or anything else that you're practicing, the 12x on here, the eye box is really, really restrictive. So if you're doing long range stuff on here, if it's prone shooting without a lot of movement, you're going to be good, and you're going to be able to get that good eye relief and see what you're shooting at. And like I said, the parallax on here works great. It's very bright and clear. But for anything fast-paced, the 12x is pretty much unusable because of how tight that eye box becomes. At 3x, it's pretty good. You can run and gun. I was doing a lot of shooting from 0 to 100 yards with it on 3x, and it was working just fine. You can bump it up to 6, 7x and still have a fairly decent eye box and also get a bunch of magnification in there. The reticle obviously works really, really well. Another thing about the reticle is because it is a second focal plane, the reticle, the hash marks are only accurate at that 12x. But if you put it to 6 instead of 2 MOA hash marks, they're now 4 MOA hash marks. So there's easier ways to get around it. But at that 12x, just keep that in mind. It's very, very tight, and you won't be doing a lot of moving and shooting with it, or at least not quickly. The next downside to an optic like this is going to be your visual distance. So, or how much you should see. So your field of view. So let's compare it to a really high-end optic for a second, the Trijicon ACOG in the 4x. So at 4x on the Trijicon ACOG, you can see 36 feet at 100 yards, which on 4x is a huge amount. It is an immense amount that you can see at 4x. An issue with this guy is that 3x on here, you can only see 32 feet. So when you bump it up to 4, that goes down to like 20 something. So you can see very little comparatively on this guy versus some more high-end optics. So the field of view on here is diminutive to say the least. So when you compound that with a tighter eye box and a lot of high quality optics, you run into some issues when trying to go fast or just how much you can see. So it's a very limiting field of view that you have on here. So for instance, I compared it earlier to the Nikon P308, which is a really good optic. That eye box at 4x is huge. It's very forgiving, it's very easy. Left, right, up, down, and forwards and backwards, of course. Even at 16x, it performs more like this guy does at 3x in terms of how forgiving the eye box is. So, two of the major issues with this guy, or the two biggest drawbacks in my opinion, are you have a very tight eye box. Even at 3x it's better, but it's not quite forgiving, I would say. And you have a very shallow field of view. And having those two at the same time is actually somewhat of a compounding effect, because you have a tight eye box and also you're not seeing a lot through the optic. So that does come into play and does create some issues. That being said though, like I mentioned, the reticle is great, the glass clarity, the light transmission is great. There's only a distortion at the very, very far edges of the optic, which you'll see in a lot of high-end optics as well, especially when you get into the higher magnification ranges. You'll get a little bit of a ring around the outside edge where there's just a little bit of distortion, and that's present on here as well. But like I said, for 200 bucks for target practice, or just hunting, going through the woods, that sort of thing, this is a pretty perfect optic for the price, and I don't think you can ask any more of it for the price. Now, if they were to come out with a slightly different design, with maybe a little bit different interior geometry and maybe a little bit different exterior as well, to give you a little bit more forgiving of an eye box, even if all the other features were the same, I think they should be able to charge $300-400 for it, and it would be an excellent bargain at that price. Really, one of the only complaints is you have a shallow field of view and you have a very tight eye box. Everything else about it, the durability, the waterproofness is a very nice feature, especially if you live in an area where it rains a lot. Like in Washington State, for instance, where I live, it rains a lot. Its durability, waterproof, the turrets work really, really well. I love how short and fat they are, so they give you a huge surface area to turn, and they're very repeatable. They're accurate. Zeroing with this guy took, I think, 6 rounds. Both times it's very, very easy to zero. So with that being said, I do think that for $200, it is an excellent optic, especially in kind of a DMR setup, for target practice, for training, for hunting, anything like that. But for serious use where you need to have as much field of view as possible and you want to have as forgiving of an eye box as possible if you're taking shots from weird positions, this probably isn't the optic for you. But for $200, if you're looking for a cheap optic or even a just budget-friendly optic that has a huge amount of value, the UTG OP3 in the 3-12, which is what I have it in. I haven't tried the 4-16. I think it's a great value. So it's something you might want to check out. And full disclosure really quick, I don't know anybody at UTG and they've never contacted me or sent me anything. This is all bought with my own money, and I think that they are an extremely high value brand, especially if you get a lot of their UTG Pro stuff, which is actually made in the USA, which is awesome. So if you want to support something that's made in the USA, you can buy their UTG Pro line of products, and of course it's made in the USA, which is really cool. But that being said, this optic I think is an amazing value for $200 or even a little under $200. It's not for everybody for sure, but if it fits one of those applications that I mentioned and it fits your budget, it might be a good way to go. So that being said, guys, that is pretty much it for the video. So thank you so much for watching. I will see you guys in the next one. Of course, please let me know what you guys think of all this down below, and I will see you guys later. Peace off.
Hey you. Yeah, you. What are you still doing here? The video's over. Wait. Why are you still here? Like, share, and subscribe. Or don't. The choice is yours. But if you do subscribe, thanks. And I like pizza. Peace off. Oh, double speed.
Ew.
Oh, ah.